January 1968, the Mekong Delta. The morning air hung thick with humidity and the scent of wet earth. Mist rolled low across the rice paddies, turning the landscape into a pale silver sea. Two American soldiers crouched behind a berm, their M60 machine gun resting on sandbags slick with dew. The jungle beyond was eerily still, until it wasn't. A low rustle. Then hundreds of faint footfalls through the fog, dark silhouettes began to emerge. An entire North Vietnamese battalion, advancing silently in the half-light. The two men exchanged a glance. They knew retreat wasn't an option. One adjusted the feed tray, the other set his sights on the lead figure. The barrel of the M60 rose, and the Delta exploded into thunder. The Mekong Delta was unlike any other battlefield in Vietnam. It was a labyrinth of waterways, mangrove swamps, and rice paddies that could swallow a truck whole. Villages sat on narrow strips of dry land, connected by dirt trails barely wide enough for a jeep. For the United States, holding this vast wetland was essential. It fed much of South Vietnam and served as a key infiltration route for North Vietnamese troops moving south from Cambodia. By late 1967, the U.S. 9th Infantry Division had been assigned to this watery front. Unlike the mountain battles of the Central Highlands, combat here was a war of ambushes and patrols. Firebases were built on slightly raised ground, lonely outposts surrounded by miles of open paddy and treeline. Small squads ventured out daily to keep supply convoys safe and to disrupt Viet Cong networks that hid in villages by day and vanished into the canals by night. The North Vietnamese army, preparing for the Tet Offensive, began to move larger forces into the Delta. Their goal: overrun isolated American positions before reinforcements or air power could arrive. That's when small unit warfare reached its brutal peak, when survival depended not on numbers, but on fire discipline and the roar of a single machine gun. The weapon that made that possible was already legendary among the troops. The M60. Nicknamed the Pig for its heavy frame and deep, guttural sound, the M60 machine gun became the backbone of American infantry firepower in Vietnam. It fired the powerful 7.62 by 51 mm NATO round at nearly 600 rounds per minute, enough to tear through trees, walls, and even light armor. Every platoon relied on its gunners to anchor the line, suppress ambushes, and buy precious seconds for maneuver or evacuation. By 1968, M60 teams were the beating heart of jungle engagements. Typically operated by two men, a gunner and an assistant, the weapon could deliver sustained fire where rifles couldn't. The assistant fed ammunition belts, swapped barrels when they overheated, and kept the gun running no matter how deep the mud or how thick the rain. But in the Mekong Delta, the terrain magnified every challenge. The weapon had to be dragged through knee-high water, cleaned of leeches and silt, and carried over rice dikes under sniper fire. And yet, it worked relentlessly. To the North Vietnamese, its staccato rhythm was instantly recognizable. The harsh metallic growl that signaled American defenders were still alive, still fighting. In early January, one such M60 team, two soldiers on a forward observation point outside a small hamlet near Kai B, found themselves surrounded by an entire battalion. Their radio was dead, their position cut off, but their gun was ready. Every M60 team was built on trust, two men who carried enough firepower to hold an entire flank. The gunner's job was simple but brutal: lay down accurate, continuous fire while the assistant gunner managed ammunition, reloaded belts, and swapped barrels when they glowed red. In the Mekong Delta, that partnership often meant the difference between holding the line and being erased in seconds. The pair outside Kai B had been dug in since dawn. Their orders were to protect a patrol route linking a canal bridge to a nearby firebase. The enemy came earlier than expected. A full North Vietnamese battalion, roughly 400 men, advancing under the cover of the morning mist. When their perimeter tripwires flared, the two Americans reacted exactly as they trained. No panic, no shouting, just muscle memory. The gunner steadied the M60 on its bipod, adjusted his sights, and waited until the lead platoon entered the open paddies. The assistant gunner unrolled fresh belts, feeding them like lifelines into the weapon. The first burst ripped through the fog, a controlled line of fire that cut down the front ranks and forced the rest to scatter. Tactically, the M60 was devastating. Its cone of fire dominated the 180-degree field in front of their berm, pinning enemy squads that tried to flank them. Each pause in firing was calculated: a few seconds to swap belts, breathe, and let the NVA believe the gun was empty. Then it roared back to life, catching them mid-charge. This wasn't chaos. It was discipline, the kind born of relentless training, the kind that turned two exhausted soldiers into the immovable center of a collapsing battlefield. The M60 was more than a weapon. It was psychological warfare in metal form. Its sound was unlike anything else in the Delta. A deep, rolling hammer that echoed across the paddies and made even hardened NVA troops freeze. Veterans often said you could feel the M60 before you heard it, a vibration in the ground, in your chest, in the very air. From a technological standpoint, it embodied American doctrine. One well-trained team could outgun an entire company. Its gas-operated action and belt-fed design meant it could fire continuously with minimal stoppages, even when drenched in mud or rain. The quick-change barrel system allowed for near-endless firing cycles, if the crew had enough ammunition and nerve to keep it going. The North Vietnamese learned to fear it. Reports from captured soldiers described the disorienting effect of sustained M60 fire. In the open terrain of the Mekong, there was nowhere to hide. Every burst chewed through cover and ricocheted across the water, making it impossible to locate the gun's exact position. For many, advancing under that fire felt like running headlong into a hurricane. To American infantrymen, it was reassurance, the voice of dominance amid confusion. When patrols were pinned, the sound of an M60 meant someone was still holding, still buying time. It built morale, not just through its firepower, but through its constancy. By late morning, the pair outside Kai B had already repelled 3 separate assaults. Their gun barrel was scorched black, their ammo nearly gone. Yet the NVA battalion, battered and frustrated, began massing for one final push. A full frontal charge meant to end it. The stage was set for the turning point. The fog began to lift just as the first mortar rounds fell. Chunks of wet soil erupted around the berm, showering the 2 gunners in mud. The North Vietnamese were done probing. They were coming in waves now, rifles raised, screaming over the paddies. The air was filled with the sound of AKs, the metallic snap of rounds passing inches above the men's helmets, and the low, mechanical growl of the M60 answering back. The gunner fired in bursts of 7 to 10 rounds, the weapon kicking violently against his shoulder. His assistant kept count, feeding the next belt seamlessly into place. Steam rose from the barrel like breath in the morning air. The gun never stopped singing its brutal rhythm. The NVA moved closer, their silhouettes multiplying, spreading through the knee-deep water. Grenades splashed nearby, sending up sprays that blinded the team for seconds at a time. Yet each time the fog cleared, the M60 roared again, cutting through ranks that refused to break. At one point, the assistant reached for a new belt and found only 2 left. The radio had long gone silent, the line cut by shrapnel. Reinforcements were still miles away. For the 2 men, this was no longer about holding position, it was about holding until death. The gunner yelled a range estimate, and together they adjusted the bipod and opened fire again. Short, controlled bursts sweeping the treeline. The ground in front of them turned into chaos. Smoke, bodies, broken rifles, shattered helmets. The M60's barrel was white-hot now, its metal hissing when splashed by water. But the gun kept running, defying its limits like the men behind it. For 3 hours, they fought without pause. And then silence, a rare, uncertain silence that meant only one thing. The enemy was regrouping. The lull didn't last. When the next wave came, it was larger, a coordinated assault with machine gun support from the treeline. Tracers zipped low over the paddies, and mortars thumped in the distance. The M60 team shifted their position slightly, crawling along the berm to a better angle. Their arms ached, their uniforms soaked and torn, but they stayed behind the gun. Then, through the haze, they spotted movement. A squad of NVA troops flanking through a flooded ditch on their right. The assistant gunner grabbed his M16 and fired short bursts, forcing them down while the gunner rotated the M60, readjusting the bipod in the mud. The weapon barked again, cutting the flank to pieces. Each movement was instinct, born from months of training that turned chaos into choreography. By early afternoon, the battalion-sized assault had stalled. Air support finally arrived, 201 Sky Raiders diving low, dropping ordnance that shook the ground like thunder. The sky filled with smoke and flame as the remaining NVA scattered, leaving behind shattered equipment and their wounded. When the first American reinforcements reached the outpost, they found the 2 men still there, the M60 resting on its bipod, its barrel warped from heat, ammunition boxes empty, and the ground around them littered with hundreds of spent casings. The team had held their ground for nearly 6 hours against a force estimated at over 400. Both men were evacuated under fire, one with shrapnel wounds, the other deafened from the concussive roar of his own gun. Their story spread through the battalion like wildfire, not as legend, but as proof of what discipline and sheer will could do in Vietnam's most unforgiving terrain. The Battle of Cai B was over, but its echoes would last for decades, and the official reports that followed. The engagement near Cai B was classified as a defensive action of exceptional resistance. Intelligence estimates placed the attacking force at between 350 and 400 NVA troops. Over 80 enemy bodies were recovered within 200 meters of the berm. The rest withdrew into the treeline, leaving weapons and equipment behind. The American position suffered 2 wounded, both from shrapnel, but no fatalities. The 2-man M60 crew were recommended for the Silver Star and the Bronze Star with V device for valor. Their commanding officer wrote that their steady and disciplined fire prevented the annihilation of the forward observation post and allowed reinforcements to arrive intact. News of the defense spread through the 9th Infantry Division within days, passed in canteen tents and along the canal patrols as proof that grit could match numbers. What those reports didn't fully capture was how that 6-hour stand reshaped local strategy in the Delta. After Cai B, American commanders took note of what 2 soldiers and a single M60 could accomplish when positioned correctly. Fire bases across the Mekong Delta began reinforcing their perimeters with interlocking fields of machine gun fire, overlapping arcs designed to mimic what those men had achieved by instinct. The doctrine of firepower defense, using superior weapons to offset enemy numbers, became the cornerstone of operations in the region through 1969. Even the North Vietnamese adapted. Captured field notes described new tactics: attack only at night, close the distance quickly, and avoid open paddies where the American guns own the daylight. The M60, once just another support weapon, had become a symbol of American resilience, a psychological barrier as much as a physical one, yet behind that reputation were just 2 soldiers who refused to give ground. Their small patch of flooded earth became an emblem of the larger truth of Vietnam, that victory and survival often depended on the courage of a few. The fight at Cai B never made front-page news. It wasn't a sweeping offensive or a decisive victory. Just 2 soldiers and a machine gun standing their ground in the middle of nowhere. Yet, in that small moment, the spirit of the American fighting man was distilled into something unmistakable. The Vietnam War was a conflict of contradictions: technology versus terrain, strategy versus chaos, numbers versus will. But again and again, it came down to the same equation. A handful of men, holding fast against impossible odds, trusting in their training and each other. The M60, heavy and unforgiving, became more than steel and fire. It was endurance made tangible, the sound of defiance echoing across flooded paddies. Long after the Delta fell silent, veterans would still remember that sound. A steady beat in the distance, cutting through the fog, reminding every man who heard it that courage is not measured in victories, but in how long one refuses to stop fighting.